So you click this video, I'm talking in an American accent, so you know it's time I start to condescendingly lecture you on how India is too bigoted, it's too superstitious, it's not feminist enough, it's not gay enough, or some other pet issue that you'll usually see in tikka masala journalism. But I'm not here to tell you that, I'm here to go deeper. But not like Alex Jones, telling you reptilians are controlling your Maggi supply, making your kids eat bugs and stuff. Not that deep. And for those of you who say I shouldn't comment on India because I wasn't born in India, well, I have one message for you.
I'm Sidhu.
Sidhu, where are you from, Sidhu?
I'm Indian.
Are you like an half caste?
I'm full Indian.
How come you don't look Indian?
My mother's mother and my mother's father, they wear Indian clothes.
How exactly are you Indian?
India.
By how?
Because I costume myself like an Indian.
So you are Indian by costume?
I'm Indian. Like I watch their film, I sing their song, I dance their dance, and I'm smelling like garlic.
You are Indian.
All around India.
Anyways, I don't want to start off with the culture stuff. In true Gujarati fashion, let's talk about the money. India has made massive strides economically since 1991, when P.V. Narasimha Rao enacted massive liberalization reforms. And especially in the past 10 years, when India went from a Fragile 5 economy to the world's top emerging market for investment and fastest growing major economy. That's a pretty rosy picture, right? Well, you just spilled Rooh Afza all over that picture because that didn't translate into a strong election win for Mr. Narendra Modi. While India as a whole is developing, a lot of the rural and poorer parts of India aren't doing so hot. Almost all economic experts say that India must do reforms that open up India's economy for more private investment, more business-friendly labor and land laws, and large reforms to India's agricultural sector. But what's so urgent about these reforms right now? Am I just butthurt about Indian election results? Well, yeah, I'm pretty butthurt, I'm not gonna lie.
What a great honor to be able to introduce for the first time ever anywhere the 40...
But good things can come out of that hurt sometimes. Reflection, introspection, excess fiber, you get my drift. But for me, it's two main things. Firstly, India can't just chum along. Its demographic dividend will soon become a deterioration. At one wing is the terror state of Pakistan, whose sole reason for semblance and unity is to screw over India. On the other wing is the wildly successful country of the People's Republic of China, which has a penchant for perpetually surprising India's armed forces, who seem to be a bit more interested in pensions rather than performance. The Red Dragon continues to fly around the Indian elephant precisely because it bit the silver bullet of economic reform and embraced iron law and order. Chinese metal will easily pierce Indian bravado and pride disguised as metal. These foreign threats and fumbling a demographic gift into a grouse can completely derail the India story. Secondly, India's opposition is just not normal. The worst commentators on India usually do this both sides type of thing that, hey, no matter who's in charge, India's gonna do really good, don't worry, everything is just gonna go up and to the right. But that's just not how economies and countries work, guys. Politics has consequences. Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, and many other nations had this type of bright prospect to them, but due to economic policy choices and bad politicians, their shiny line chart that kept going up and to the right suddenly shifted south and really hasn't recovered since. In 2024, the Congress Party and its allies proposed the exact opposite type of manifesto one would need for economic development. It was mainly focused on caste and redistribution. Add to the fact that the Congress Party frequently begs for international interference, I don't think that's really what a developing economy really needs, nor a country that's been the victim of colonialism for hundreds of years. India's opposition has morphed into an existential threat to India itself. Only economic growth can help India escape from the economic desperation encouraged by the Congress Party. Now, some people might say, hey, can't freebies and welfare solve all of India's economic woes? There are plenty of videos of people availing freebie benefits and their lives hugely improving because of it. I'm not trying to deny the impact of that. But freebies and welfare, well, they're basically temporary band-aids or crutches. They don't replace actual economic structural change. The economy needs stronger muscles. It needs to be able to move better. It's similar to a human body in that way. You can't just have these temporary medicines citizens. You need the body to grow and evolve into something anew. India has to enact reforms to get away from the current feudal agrarian structure focused on agriculture and instead go into manufacturing. Like all other developed economies in the world, India needs to get people off farms and into factories. On top of that, freebies aren't really free. The buck eventually comes knocking at the door, as we've seen in various states that have enacted massive freebies in the past couple of years. So why doesn't India just enact these reforms? It's simple enough, right? Propose it, pass it through the parliament, and then boom, boom, bang, bang, you know? It's done. Well, obviously that's not how it goes. And the unfortunate answer to this question of why India doesn't reform is, well, Indians. Alright, you could get the hate comments out of the way. I know what you're thinking. I don't blame you. Comment as much as you want, but stay with me a little. It's not what you think. Significant economic reform only arrived in India at the gunpoint of the IMF in 1991, with the foolish bravery of Atal Bihari Vajpayee in the early 2000s, and today with Narendra Modi, who narrowly won a third mandate, despite a second term of economic liberalization, privatization, fiscal discipline, and even backing down on 2 reforms in labor and agriculture. Only by his sheer personality, as well as a lot of welfare done prior, did Modi eke through a victory. Electoral backlash has whipped all 3 reformist prime ministers in the face. 2 of them were kicked out of parliament. 1 came with a very reduced majority. Reforms are tough in democratic states in general, or even states in general, but Indian society means executing reforms is basically playing on hard mode. You're probably going to lose an election, honestly. Just why is this though? A lot of other countries have also done economic reforms. What's so tough about it? Well, you have to remember this. Most of developed countries did economic reforms prior to the age of the internet, if not when the internet wasn't as crazy as it is today due to social media. Along with that, many of these countries, whether democracies or not, did very undemocratic things to push through the reforms, much of which includes violence and state coercion towards its citizens. This is stuff that you really can't get away with these days, especially in democracies where there is a huge chance of electoral backlash. But India is still one level up from this. It's not just democracy and the internet that are a problem here. I mean, we're kind of going on legendary or God of War mode at this point. The biggest reasons for Indian difficulty in reform is because the Indian society is exceptionally strong versus its state, as well as India being extremely diverse. Yatha Raja Tatha Praja. As is the king, so are his subjects. This is a famous Sanskrit proverb on governance, but democracy flips this monarchic phrase on its head. Yatha Praja Tatha Raja. As are the subjects, so is the king. American political scientist Myron Weiner has described India as a strong society, weak state country. The politicians are at the will of society, a wily hydra-like beast unable to be broken or tamed. Sometimes its heads snap at each other in a cannibalistic frenzy that can only be curtailed by the snapping of the state's whip. India is not for beginners, especially when it comes to politics. If India's society was homogenous in, say, a Han manner, we would naturally see a strong state. That isn't to say India should be homogenous like the Han though. I think there's a lot of benefits of Indian diversity, but we also have to face some of the negatives. India's demographic diversity eclipses even its geographic diversity. We have a raucous, constantly squibbling society that translates into a patronage-based decentralized state. Each group has its own lord and connection to the central apparatus. This is very different than a lot of other democracies and even parliamentary systems. This amount of diversity combined with democracy, well, it starts to create some rough edges between groups. Integral to understanding this decentralized polity and rambunctious society is something I like to call my community Izzat. I was inspired by my early days as a Redditor to come up with this phrase. Here's a quick picture of me back then. Perhaps in more serious terms, we should call it Izzatism. Izzat is an Urdu word for honor or pride, and most other Indian languages also have a similar type of word. Izzatism is the phenomenon by which Indian reform and governance are thwarted by violent or electoral threats from communities that feel that their Izzat or pride is being threatened by said reform or even governance. Izzat-based claims are frequently covered for economic dominance or extraction, as well as societal suppression of other groups. Nonetheless, the idea of Izzat can turbocharge a group and intensify violent mobilization in a way not seen in other societies. This type of resistance to reform is exceptional. When interfacing with the state, Izzat is placed at the forefront. Policies, reforms, and even patronage of other groups, it must pass through the sieve of Izzat, or else a community will enact its wrath on the state, whether with the bullet or with the ballot. All normal government functions and development must first do a battle with community pride, with Izzat. Lal Bahadur Shastri coined the phrase Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan. But nowadays this phrase is kind of atrophied, it's decayed, as we see sectors like agriculture and defense, or the armed forces, be very, very resistant to reform. And a lot of this resistance, well, the rhetoric around it is usually about Izzat. This has led to India's agricultural sector being a total mess and the farm reforms being repealed. Many other smaller countries are much more efficient with their agricultural production than India. India has a potential to become an agricultural powerhouse in the world, but its resistance to these reforms have simply left it behind. When it comes to the army, it's becoming a bit more popular narrative that even the central government doesn't really trust its performance, especially considering some of its lackluster innings in the past few years. Okay, so Indian people are really proud of their identities. Is that really the end of the world? I mean, so what? That's like the beauty of India, isn't it? So many different castes and ethnicities and religions and peoples all coming together to be India, the idea of India. It's amazing, isn't it? Well, that's a good story, and it's honestly a pretty true story, but there's a dark side to this. What if there was a thing as too much diversity, where a place has so much diversity and difference that it starts lacking coherence, where common goals become very difficult, where zero-sum thinking beats moving forward together, where jealousy beats out advancement. I call this idea India's obesity of diversity. But when you combine India's hyper-diversity with a scarcity of resources plus democracy, that's a potent recipe for a lot of inter-Indian conflict and suspicion and strife between groups. So when the time for reform comes, many groups will feel like their identity is being attacked or their market is being attacked, and they get jealous of other groups, or they feel that they're being treated unfairly. And at the end of the day, economic reforms, they do break up current monopolies or oligopolies in markets. So I get the proposition of it being a threat to someone's economic livelihood. But India needs reform. India needs to move forward. It can't be simply stuck in this stasis of society. You see this happening on a mass scale currently with the idea of Jatitva and redistribution. When it comes to Jatitva, the INC as well as other opposition parties encourage a caste-first type of mindset. They encourage the view of economic progress and development as solely an upper caste benefit and endeavor. That's why they propose things like massive redistribution and caste censuses and proportional power and profits in any sector you can imagine. They encourage caste mongers and parochialists in every single caste to create a suspicion between all castes. With this happening, that means the BJP can't really win because their USP is uniting as many Hindu castes as possible. Now each caste is mired in chauvinism or fear, uncertainty, doubt, or the cardinal emotion of envy, and the BJP's coalition breaks down while the INC comes to power. Now everyone loves Indian diversity. Abroad it wins platitudes of unity and diversity, tolerance, secularism, pluralism, and various other feel-good words that paper over the grotesque condition of much of the country, easily revealable with a casual stroll in an average alley, or nowadays a white supremacist timeline on Twitter. Within India, there's definitely a valid view that India's diversity contributes to India's uniqueness and preservation of traditions. But today these traditions are eroding away like ancient ruins, once painted streaks of red and gold, but now devoid of sanctity and worship. The crucibles of India's traditions, jati or caste, are now essentially ethnic identities divorced from religious rites. Jati is frequently paired with Varna, but now we see a third partner, category. General category, other backwards class, scheduled tribe, scheduled caste are much more salient than Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and Dalit. Bureaucratization and racialization of caste have created a vicious seesaw competition between groups. Jati-Varna-Category is a real triple lens to understand caste as well as India's diversity. Each Indian group peers at each other with beady little eyes, uncaring of any advancement save that which is one tier, one step, 1 inch of the other India. There is no there, there's only here. Going beyond is an imagination. Falling behind is a reality. The Indian will never move forward as long as he is looking over his shoulder. I know I'm being kind of super negative here and in a way probably a bit unfair, but I think we need to start looking a bit harsher at the idea of Indian diversity. While India is centralizing physically through infrastructure, mentally with technology, economically with reforms, and even culturally with Hindutva or nationalism, it still has strong forces pulling it apart on identity lines. Part of this is mostly harmless. I mean, there are real reasons for Indians to be attached to their identity. Whether it's traditions, cultures, social circles, economic relationships, there are plenty of real reasons to be proud and attached to one's identity. I don't think that's a problem. But for many of the people who try to pull apart from this Indian identity, I'm talking about the leaders of this type of movement of separation. A lot of it is rooted in the stigma and shame of the Indian identity itself. Globally, India is still regarded as a poor and backward society. For this reason, some of these parochialists try to run away from the idea of India. They'll attach themselves to X identity over the Indian identity. Liberal elites differentiate themselves via class by taking on the mores and cultures and tastes of the global elite or global liberalism, whatever's popular in Manhattan or London or South Mumbai. Caste parochialists always laud their legendary and amazing history and caste exploits, but blame the present condition or deterioration of their caste on this caste or that caste or whoever they could point their finger at first. Regionalists believe there's something different from Indians, no matter their skin color or smell or how many times they get called some Indian slur. They try to make outsiders think that there's some special type of Indian or not Indian or something really cringe and weird. I mean, come on, Mike and Stacy just think you're Indian, dude. Like, that's the end of that. Religious hardliners try to explain away their Indian identity in pretty comical ways and usually attack Indians in a way that would make Uncle Tom blush. Apostasy from the Indian identity is upward social mobility for these folks, or at least they think it is. Of course, one step outside the subcontinent and they'll realize that all they are and ever will be is an Indian. Why is there no consequence for this apostasy or treason of the Indian identity? Well, why would there be? So separate is Indian society that many people would say, is it even a society itself? How can there be a betrayal of the Indian identity when there's barely a consciousness of kind between Indians? While some point to India's storied tradition of debate and pluralism, those are very true, the scathing and slavish demeanor of a lot of these parochialists, these apostates, these betrayers, well, it naturally evokes a sense of disgust from a cosmopolitan or nationalistic or well-adjusted Indian. The behavior is plainly unnatural. So how do we solve this? Well, luckily it's already underway. First, we need to look at the idea of rural and urban India. Check out this chart to see the difference in voting patterns for India's BJP. They obviously do a lot better when it comes to urban India versus rural India. Why do I bring up the BJP? Well, the BJP, as well as a few other parties, are probably the only ones interested in actual development and reform. As I mentioned prior, the INC and the India Opposition Alliance, they just don't seem to care about this. Not just that, but they also benefit from India's rural character and rural votes. You might assume that India's rural areas are more conservative, they're a lot more right-wing, and they're a lot more religious. But as I said before, India is not for beginners, especially its politics. You have to throw those notions out the door. Caste and freebies can override all of that. Not just that, but you also have to examine the phenomenon of urbanization and what it does to Indians as well as its history within India. Between 1000 BC and 400 BC, India massively urbanized. New ideas about the individual and Indian were being birthed as aristocrats debated in the courts of kings, with some shedding their clothes, shaving their colored beards, and shelving their golden finery to be clad in fiery robes. India's cities birthed new conceptions of self, science, philosophy, and even dharma. From the heartbeat of these new metropolises came a new Indian culture. History is rhyming as a nascent urbanization urbanization is emerging now. A huge migration, mixing, and centralization is occurring across India. Identities, sub-identities, and sub-sub-identities, they're all facing a tsunami of change. How they evolve is anyone's guess, but India's destiny is to orient itself towards its cities. A looming delimitation of India's parliamentary seats means that urban areas will receive more seats versus rural areas than prior. The balance between urban and rural India is shifting in urban India's favor. But how exactly can urbanization save India from its obesity of diversity? Urbanization is important because as Indians urbanize, their parochial or local identities give way to more cosmopolitan identities. This is not to say that caste or ethnic or any other identities should be annihilated or destroyed, nor does it mean that Indian cities will totally wipe these types of identity consciousness. But their salience and importance, they will diminish. Voting patterns in urban areas usually point to less sticky caste voting, or at least being more friendly towards economic development. As always, there are exceptions to this, but I'm telling you the general trend. It seems to be pointing in that direction fairly clearly. Young urban India, as well as those flocking towards it, they have a different mentality. There is a brimming sense of optimism and passion and ambition for India's next generation of change makers. One really important thing to understand is young Indians are connected to the internet from a young age in ways that prior generations have never been. This means they see a lot of the success of Indians abroad, but more importantly, they see the success of the world. They realize a lot of the dysfunction of India currently, it doesn't need to be that way. There's an element in their minds of thinking, why can't we be successful? Why can't we get rid of pollution? Why can't we get rid of poverty? Why can't we have livable cities? Why can't we have breathable air? Why do we have to have all this social dysfunction? All the terrible parts about India, well, some of it will stay, but some of it will go through the process of alchemy. Those Indians who want to be the change they see in the world, as Gandhiji said previously, well, they are going to be the biggest change makers in India. And as India has a fairly favorable macro situation, an upswinging economy, those Indians who go for the throat of success, they're going to be successful. They understand India's flaws, but more importantly, they understand India's potential. Joining urbanization and perhaps a savior of India's rural areas will be industrialization. Currently, around 45% of India's workforce is engaged in agriculture. An estimated 20 to 25% is engaged in manufacturing. The transition away from farming is directly correlated with going into manufacturing. This means as India urbanizes, as it industrializes, the scope for a lot of the bad policies of India's opposition, policies that have held back India for nearly 60, 70 plus years, well, they start to lose purchase. As India urbanizes and industrializes, the bad habits of the opposition will be punished, and their strength will diminish. This is why reform is very important. This is why Indian society needs to be overcome in a way. India has to move forward, and the only way to do that is urbanization and industrialization. Industrialization will be an incantation of steel. Only through the sorcery of the city can India move past the witchcraft of ruralism. The ethic of agriculture must be sacrificed at the altar of industry. The cult of the village must be supplanted by the creed of the polis. The metronomic mantra of manufacturing, a systematic chanting of silicon and steel, will finally deliver India to its destiny, far beyond both optimists and pessimists. Thanks again everyone for listening, especially through a more, ranty episode. But while I have some worries about India, I'm still very positive, and obviously I'm still rooting for it. I think the government will adjust, but more importantly, like I said, there is a golden generation emerging in India of young Indians. These are the people to watch out for. Anyways, this is Akshar from the Emissary. Please like, comment, share, subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.